You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So hi everyone, welcome all to another episode of Changing Reality. So thank you guys for joining us again for today's interview. If this is your first time joining, where have you been all our lives? Welcome to the show. And Changing Reality, for those of you who may not be familiar, is a show on WQHS Radio here at Penn that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are essentially changing their own reality. So through this show, we'll be hanging out and interviewing amazing people from social change makers, entrepreneurs, business owners, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals, thought leaders in a sense from all across the world, and many of them who are from the Penn campus themselves. So by hearing these inspiring stories on how they managed to not only change the reality for themselves, but to create ripple effect in the lives of those around them, hopefully we'll be able to take little nuggets of wisdom, learn the lessons that they went through so that we can apply it in our own lives as well. And I wanted to do this show simply because I feel like there are a lot of people that we meet every single day on campus that we don't really get to hear their stories in a sense, and they do phenomenal things and they really make change in the lives of those around them. And I'm super passionate about learning how they came to the places that they are, what their stories are, and hopefully by learning those stories, we'll be able to kind of make references in our own life and pursue a journey that we are passionate about. So personally, to show you how much I am a believer in the power of stories, I actually founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance back at home in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, that collaborates with not only our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but 28 different countries to actually provide an alternative education platform for any student out there who wants to change their reality. So we work with students from elementary to high school through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities that help them discover their passion, learn about themselves and the world around them, and actually go out there and start their own careers while they're still in school that creates meaningful impact for themselves and those around them as well. And we've been very fortunate to work with over 35,000 students at 970 communities and have incubated countless number of student-run projects and social enterprises run by students aged 8 to 25 years old. And the reason we've been able to do all of that is because of kind people who have been willing to share their stories, who have been willing to share their experiences with those who need to hear them. And similarly, like that, I hope that this show is that platform for you so that you can listen to the stories that will craft your life path as well. So if there's anything specific that you want to talk about, that you want to hear more about, or a specific person or a specific industry you want to explore, let us know in the chat below and we'll try our best to make sure we take it all sometime in the run of the show. So on to today's episode. Today we have someone who is absolutely amazing, a professor at Wharton, for many of you who may know him. And he's a professor of marketing at the Wharton School and the faculty director of the Wharton Customer Analytics, which, for those who don't know, is the world's most preeminent academic research center focusing on the practice of data-driven business decision makings. So his research interests are amazingly wide in the areas of pricing and social networks, and he's even taught in areas of market research and analytics. And it's amazing to read a lot of the things that he has been publishing over the last couple of years. I've personally been a fan, and today we'll even get into some of his latest research. He's someone whose work has been published in the Journal of Marketing Research, the Journal of Consumer Research, and Marketing Science as well. So without further ado, let's welcome our amazing professor and our guest speaker for today's interview onto our show. So hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Harsha. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the show. As I said, I'm a fan of your work recently. I've been reading up a little bit, and I'm personally someone who thinks it's very timely and very interesting with a lot of things that's going on in the world right now. But I'm jumping, in a sense, to that part of the interview. I shall silence myself on that. But I'm very interested in finding out how you actually got into this field, in a sense. You research on things like social networks or subscription-based models, which today seem very, very much relevant to what's happening. But how did you predict that this would be the next big thing that you needed to get into? Was this a field of interest, something that you always had in, or were you someone who didn't even expect to, I would say, get to this industry where you are now?
No, first, kind words. Thank you. No, I mean, I guess I wish I were able to predict. I would be probably making a lot of money, but no. So I think it happens as as you said. Being a professor involves being passionate about what one does in terms of research and so on. And my journey kind of started as a grad student at Columbia. That's where I did my PhD, and my first job was here at Wharton back in 2005. And if I kind of turn back time, even then I was interested in pricing. It happened to be my dissertation area as well. And over time, I think, you start kind of getting into new things as you're surrounded by different people. So one of my colleagues, Christoph van den Bulte, who is in my department as well, wonderful colleague, does a lot of work on social networks. And just as I formed my network with him, I kind of got excited about that space as well. And so I think it was by osmosis. I mean, our offices are just next to each other, just separated by a conference room on the seventh floor in Huntsman. So if you're ever around there, stop by. But that's how I kind of gotten into social networks as well. I think you sort of get excited by what intrinsically excites you and the people you hang out with.
All right, you've wrapped up like what I would say most people struggle
Yeah.
to find the golden truths in life, in a sense, the environment you're in, and kind of like pursuing what your heart wants, in a sense. So I think we can end the interview right there. No, I'm joking. But it's very interesting that you actually, I would say that you actually pursued that as a grad student. I think many of us don't really think of our professors as students ever, in a sense, and hence we torture you with our many questions and our much indecision as the people who we're learning from, in a sense. I'm very curious, in a sense, how you actually figured out that this field of academia was for you. I think you actually studied engineering while you were a bachelor's degree student, right?
Yes.
How did you go from that path, or what was your initial decisions of what you wanted to do with your life, in a sense? Was it always steered here, or was it a process of figuring it out as well?
I think it was certainly a mix of the two. When I was growing up, as you said, I went to undergrad at IIT, one of the engineering schools
Amazing
in India.
university.
No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a great school. It's also very humbling because you realize that there are people way smarter than you are, which is good. I mean, I think to be surrounded by people who are smarter and more, have done a lot more things because it helps you kind of set the goal in terms of where you want to be, hopefully. But I went there, and it so happened that my brother, who was 5 years older than I was, he had gone there as well, did amazing things. My dad was a professor at IIT. So I think, sort of surrounded by
The
academics, growing up in
osmosis
this,
theory as well, right?
it very much so. And I think, a lot of people still ask me, professor seems like something obscure. Why would I want to do that? And B, it seems very risky. Both of them for me were actually kind of less risk because it was a common path that was treaded by my brother, my parents, and other people I knew growing up. And B, it seemed like sort of very kind of the end of a path of a journey that I was taking anyways, because I saw my dad, I saw my mom, she's a PhD in biochemistry. It's like that seemed like a fun thing to do. Like, okay, let's do it.
Okay, that I think that is something that we all like don't even realize at times, the influence the people around us have, in a sense.
Absolutely.
And then, like, prior to being an entrepreneur, I remember as a kid, I used to see my mom going to the office, and I used to think, like, I want to one day be like her, work in a corporate job. I used to dream about that, in a sense, and then I realized later only that, okay, maybe that's not so much for me, in a sense. For you, in a sense, what was the turning point from engineering that made you really look at, okay, maybe I want to do something else, maybe I want to go into analytics and all, which is a bit of a jump, a bit of
Certainly.
a, yeah, a little bit different from where you started out, in a sense. I know that you pursued your MBA as well after your bachelor's degree, and did a pivot there too.
So the way it worked out was I finished my undergrad, and then at some point, I had come to grad school actually here in the US, in Maryland, for my PhD in engineering. And at some point, I think 2 years into the journey, I realized that I did want to be an academic. I sort of, I gave, at least I guess, that's, as you said, osmosis had come in at that time. But I somehow just could not see myself getting excited by engineering problems. So quite honestly, I think this was certainly, as I think you'd asked me, was it a well kind of treaded path? Did I had everything? And I didn't. And this was a little bit of soul searching for me. Kind of where is it that I would like to use things that I'm excited about. So I was excited about using math, statistics, things that I was more familiar with. But looked around for an opportunity in terms of understanding what are other areas that are exciting. And it turned out that a little bit fortuitous that I came across marketing, and quite honestly, I had really little idea of marketing before that. But it turned out that the people that I started reading papers of were people who had a very similar background. And the kinds of things that they were doing at that time, and many of them are still doing many, many, many exciting extensions of what they were doing, is recommendation systems. They were doing things on promotion programs, things of that nature, which seemed like, wow, that's kind of interesting. At some point, it seemed like using mathematical tools or statistical tools to answer questions about consumer behavior. And so that seemed like a great marriage that I was very excited about. And so that's how I kind of said, well, maybe that's the area that I can apply what I'm comfortable with, but at the same time, something I truly got more excited about than what I was doing in engineering.
No, very, very cool. And I like how you say it's kind of like this intersection between the statistics of it and also the consumer behavior side of it. I feel like there is a very fascinating infrastructure. I think all great mathematicians and scientists have been trying to figure out the algorithm for human behavior.
Yeah,
And I think with the work that you do, we're getting
yeah,
one step closer at the very least, in a sense, to see in a consumer point of view what that means in a way. When you started, in a sense, and in that PhD process, number one, having to pivot
yeah,
from two very polarizing fields and all of
yeah,
that, and then like having to come up with a dissertation, having to actually find out what you wanted to research on,
yeah.
that itself is a very, I would say, daunting process. I know some PhD students that I recently met who are cracking their heads trying to figure out what they want to focus on specifically, what they want to kind of like write their thesis on. So for you, what was your experience with that? Did you one day, I don't know, have a light bulb moment and then suddenly said, okay, this is the secret to human behavior. I need to tell the world. Or how did you go about finding out, like, at least that first bit of research, what you wanted to do?
So I wish I could claim the light bulb scenario was not. And you could say I had a light bulb moment after about, I would say, 15 or 20 ideas I had were rejected by my advisors. So yes, the light bulb moment happened, but happened very late. But no, I think, again, there are people who obviously are extremely smart. They may have some sense of what may work, what may not work. I didn't happen to be one of those. I think it took some time to figure out what is it. I knew that I was excited around the area of pricing. And, again, I've read a bunch of papers around it, kind of how do people respond to different kinds of prices. But at the same time, for your dissertation, as one of my advisors, Sunil Gupta, who's now a professor at Harvard, used to say, well, for your dissertation, you need to have the right kind of intersection between new data and new models. So it has to be, you can't kind of go ahead and reinvent the wheel for sure. But at the same time, you don't want to be applying, sophisticated new models to data that sounds boring. So it was an interesting intersection of the two that hopefully can get you a good job. And so a lot of it was searching around kind of what may be interesting areas of research. And just to kind of add on to what you were saying about dissertation, there are different points of view on what dissertation should be. One point of view is, well, you work on a paper, you work hard on it, you go onto the job market with it, which is the academic job market. That kind of becomes your dissertation. There could be other papers along the way. For me, I think the way I think about dissertation is, and that's also obviously influenced by my advisors, is that this is something that you really worked hard on getting comfortable with. You've understood the context. You've worked for 2-3 years almost, kind of really honing into perhaps a nuanced problem, but at least understanding that context. So it has to be something that, for the want of a better thing, like something that has legs. What that means is, just as you drink wine, which I think you don't, but if you sip a glass of wine and you say, wow, this has good body, good legs, what is it that you're trying to say? It has a long kind of permanent mark. And so the hope is, if you put in all this fixed cost of understanding the context, it has to be something that hopefully can give you many multiple papers. So that was also a challenge because it can't be that this idea that you come around with is interesting, but perhaps for one paper. Then, well, that was interesting, but you got to generate many such ideas once you start becoming a professor. And so the hope was that, which I'm glad my advisors were as kind of passionate about this as I was, if not more. They kind of kept pushing me, and hopefully they saw some potential. They kept pushing me to say, well, think about the idea, think about what other things you can do with it. And so I think it was a lot of back and forth. I wouldn't say there was really a time when I could say, well, that is the idea and let's go.
If
Didn't
you
happen.
could, then I'd start getting lottery numbers from you. But
Exactly.
no, and I think that's such a very real problem in a sense. Like you mentioned, like that opening phrase, which is some people maybe are brilliant and they can have that light bulb moment. Other people, like there's a trial and error period to it. I feel like 99% of people fall into that
Yeah,
category of like it's a conversation that you have in figuring out what it is.
exactly.
And it's very interesting that I also like that you mentioned that it's not about just having an idea that you can write one paper about. In a sense, it's something that you can constantly go back to, which
Yeah.
is much harder to think about in terms of kind of like looking at the longevity of it. Today, when you work with students, and many of these students probably are may not even know what idea
Yeah.
would have that longevity and things like that. What do you advise them in a sense, or how do you guide them to start coming up with these ideas? Because number one, I think we've reached a point where everyone feels, into an extent, that every good idea has been thought of already in a
So,
sense,
yeah.
and the fear that they may not be able to come up with something original, or that's exciting enough, or that people want to hear about, probably is there as well. So how do you basically steer them into finding those ideas?
No, I think it's a great question. I thought the same in 2004 when I was doing my PhD. Every good idea has been done. Uh, Fast forward 2022, I'm sure it's the same. But I think the good news is, even though, yes, many ideas have been done, there's always room for thinking clearly, perhaps revisiting a problem, perhaps coming up with new problems altogether. And the way I tell at least the students I work with is that one has to be persistent. I think there's a lot to say about creativity for sure, obviously. But I think at the same time, like anything else, like, being an entrepreneur, you're probably making a lot of pitches, and not every pitch works. Sometimes it works, sometimes people are not as excited. But you have to have this inner passion to say, well, let's forget about this one, let's go to the next pitch. I think it's the same thing for PhD students. You're in for a long marathon, as I call it. It's about 5-year journey, and there would be obviously lots of hurdles along the way. It's easier to give up than to keep going sometimes. But you just, if you truly believe that that is what you want to do, got to be persistent and keep thinking about tinkering with problems. Think about problems that perhaps have hopefully extensions that you're excited about. And so what I kind of tell PhD students to do is like think about problems that hopefully can define who you are, especially dissertation. These are, and again, one of my advisors jokingly, perhaps not somewhat jokingly, used to say that, if you're coming up for tenure, which is, something that all academics want to, get through that hurdle. If you're coming up for tenure and people have to open up, quote unquote, your packet to see what you do, you're already doomed. Uh, so you need to have an identity. An identity is an area. The identity is perhaps things that you've done that collectively form your portfolio. Like a serial entrepreneur. Obviously a serial entrepreneur obviously gets a lot more respect than the first time entrepreneur. And the reason is because they've had multiple successes along the way. And so to me, I think kind of if you think about your academic portfolio in exactly that way, you can't be one hit wonder. Nobody's going to like that. Unless, of course, that's like, the biggest thing out there.
You
Usually,
became science in a sense, but yeah.
exactly. Mostly, most people are not that. But, if you're going to have multiple hits, hopefully it, in some sense, conducively and altogether forms a coherent portfolio. And so that's what I urge people to do. Like, rather than just doing one thing after another, which is more kind of just driven by opportunity, you should think more proactively and kind of say, what are some things that perhaps I should be doing? And what are some things, even though look attractive, somehow just don't fall into the swim lane that I want to be in?
But that's great advice, not just for PhD students. I think that's great life advice in itself, because like the idea of like opportunities are in abundance in the world, in a sense, and to find the ones that basically build that coherent narrative in your life, I
Exactly.
think is the real challenge more than
Yeah.
just jumping on something, in a sense. So wow. I asked my PhD students, why am I like feeling the burn now? Oh no. But I think it's a good segue into your life as a lecturer and in working with a lot of these students.
Sure.
You are obviously, just for them, from that one question, and from, I would say, the many fans and people that you've taught, are definitely an amazing professor, in a sense, with so much insight. How was it like when you first started teaching? Was it as smooth sailing as it is now, or and even more, I would say, the work that you did is so nuanced. And Wharton has brilliant students, in a sense, and many of them are, as I would argue, much more smarter than me at the very least. So how was the first experience addressing this class of extremely bright and intelligent people, and bringing them through the work or the modules that you had, in a sense?
No,
And
again,
young
as
to be
all.
such a professor, right? You're in your 20s. Oh my God, that is in itself an achievement.
Well, I mean, again, I had a very nice role model in my brother who is much smarter than I am, and who was a professor much earlier than I was. So thankfully,
Siblings.
so that was good to at least see what one can do. But for me, I think again, like everything else, you learn by reinforcement. And so, the first time I was teaching, I had some great mentors. There are people like Pete Fader, Eric Bradlow, who are in my department, and who had taught that class before, who had obviously lots more experience under their belt than I did. And so, got some great advice, but at the end of the day, in some sense, it was finding your own voice, and finding the way youth can connect with students. And I had the opportunity again of visiting different people's classrooms before I started teaching, because I was teaching so I joined in, it seemed a long time ago, July of 2005. It is a long time ago. But I was not teaching, if I remember correctly, till spring of 2006. So I had fall of 2005, pretty much kind of, just getting adjusted, coming to Penn, kind of getting into the habit of kind of, becoming a professor. So I went in there, sat in some of these classes, and amazingly good professors. I mean, like Dave Reepstein, who's a senior colleague. I had an opportunity to sit with David Bell, who is not with us anymore. He has gone off to do his own fund. So he's clearly, kind of riding on what he knows. Uh, Everybody had a different style. And what was interesting to see was, while everybody had a different style, each one of them was equally successful. And so,
Yeah.
what that helped me see was that there is no one path to success when one starts teaching. You have to find a way that resonates best with your personality. And you have to find a way that you think can convey the content in a way that resonates with students. And different people are very different. And so I think for me, the initial maybe a year or two was just finding my own voice, trying to understand what works, what doesn't work. Because I think if you just simply try to mimic or imitate somebody else in terms of what works, you can't carry it through all the way. Because at some point, that's not you. And so for me, I joke around a lot. I think for me, it's been also like, yeah, people want to learn, but at some point, learning can be boring if it's in a very, very stressful / pressure driven environment. And so, talking about, a little joke here and there, kind of making it as relevant as possible to students who are taking the class in terms of where I think, now that I've obviously had a few more years, where I think this kind of thing would be helpful as they graduate. So I didn't have as many stories before. Obviously, that took some time, but I have those stories now. So I think it's just finding, getting comfortable in your own skin is what I call it.
Okay. That again with the life advice. Okay. Oh, like it's very like an amazing answer, in a sense. And I definitely think that I would say for any students watching, if you have the opportunity, make sure that you join one of his classes so that you can see
Please do.
you can see it for yourself in a sense. You also teach, I think, the executive education classes
Yeah,
and MBA, of course, and so forth. So there's also a lot of people who are practitioners in their life in a sense in
absolutely.
marketing. And I'm sure that's a bit of a different approach from us confused, lost undergrads in a sense at times. So when you speak, and I'm sure you consult for companies as well on a lot of this
Yeah.
work and all. When when seeing kind of the intersection between the research that you do and the practicality of it, how do you make sure that you convey the work that you do in a sense that it can be applied by these people who are probably in a class and then they're going out there and they're
Yeah.
seeing it in their day-to-day work? Is there a different style of communicating that, or is there a method that you employ in being able to clearly define those?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think one of the things that, again, at least organically has been happening over time as one gets comfortable with teaching, is that I think the audience also, as the audience differs, even though you may have the same message, you have to give it in a way that is a little bit more resonating with that audience. So, for instance, I'll give you a tangible example, as will be the best for the audience here. When we talk about, let's say, subscription programs, if I give it like at the 30,000 feet level, yeah, subscription programs, I talk a lot about, some research that I've recently done, but then I give it more of a perspective of, if you were a manager in one of these companies, what are some things you should be thinking about? And so you should probably be thinking about the revenues, but don't forget about the costs, and so on and so forth. Now, if you take the same exact kind of content, but let's say you're talking to the analysts or somebody who's more technical, they are probably more interested in, so how did you go about doing this? Like, what are the nuts and bolts? And so, while it might be helpful for them to kind of understand the big picture, they want to get into the weeds. And so, understanding what the audience is kind of thinking about and where they're coming from helps you to kind of understand, do you want to be at the 100 feet level or the 10,000 feet level? And then appropriately kind of pitch that same exact idea in different ways.
Very, very interesting, and definitely a very, I would say, you make being a professor sound like very scary to me. At the very least, it's like you are.
No, it's exciting.
It's like there's the analytics of the research and then the analytics of the people that you're meeting, where you have to process that, and then you have to do some internal, I would say, algorithm to figure it out. I think. I don't know about you, but I think hopefully someone watching this will do a paper on the professors that we have and their
Oh, well,
process
I,
in a sense
I,
of
I
doing.
am sure there are already people, at least if they're not doing a paper, they've internally ranked them. So I
Yeah.
hope I'm up on top. We'll see.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
very cool. Let's talk a little bit about some of your research and the stuff that you've been
sure.
focusing on. I've personally recently heard from the many fans and rumors circulating the work that you're doing, that you recently were doing this work research on kind of like loyalty programs and kind of the profitability inside of it.
Yeah,
It's quite interesting in a sense that I was reading about it, that like for some people find that when they subscribe to something, or when they or when kind of like they already have an engagement with it, they're more likely to spend twice as much on that. And that's very interesting for me, and your research is of course much more comprehensive than my one sentence can do justice to. When you come up with ideas like this, it personally seems very timely, with some of the recent, I would say, news regarding
yeah,
some specific subscription model based companies that I shall not name any names. But of course, if you guys follow in the news, you'll know what's happening.
yeah.
How do you come up with research that basically can predict what's happening out there in a sense, and that is so relevant to what's going on?
No, I think, again, I wish I knew 4 or 5 years ago when we started this project. That is typically the time length. I wouldn't say 5 years is a long time, but this paper went through 4 rounds, so it was a reasonably intensive review, which is very good from the journal's perspective as well. Journal of Marketing Research, which is where this was published, and I think the review team was amazing in terms of giving a lot of constructive feedback, how to make that paper better and more impactful. But the reason I bring this up is it's very hard to predict what might happen, when you start the paper versus something that happens later. Uh, I was naturally curious about subscription programs, just as a result of some of the work that I'd done before. an opportunity came up to collaborate with a colleague and actually a Wharton alumni in Cornell, a professor called Young Hoon Park, and a PhD student here at Wharton, who is now a professor at Singapore Management University, SMU, Chi Yu. So we just said, well, this is the right kind of question to ask. Did we know that there will be a lot of people outside who will be interested in it? Yeah, certainly. I mean, subscriptions had been obviously quite interesting even then, but I think it just took a life of its own just because of the recent news about many different subscriptions, unfortunately, not working out. And so I think in that sense, it is fortuitous that it happened. But I would say I don't think we had any of that in mind when we started it. We were interested in the problem. I think subscriptions were hot even then. But it was sort of like, well, yeah, we would really want to study how is it that people are behaving, and what are the kinds of things that can happen under programs that perhaps are not anticipated. And so those are the kinds of things, at least that got us excited.
Tell us a bit about the process of coming up with that piece of research. In a sense, I feel like as students we take it for granted. We're scheming, we're looking through journals and like finding quotes for our papers and all of that. We don't appreciate the amount of effort that actually goes into it. I think your team interviewed something like 24,000 different like people for the piece of research, in a sense, and of course it's a 5-year process, so it's a huge endeavor in a sense. Tell us from your point of view, so the person
Yeah.
doing the research, what are the things that we the readers miss out when we're engaging with this?
No, I think again, at the end of the day, the way I tell people is that when the research paper is written, the paper should not hopefully be a temporal reading of what has gone in. It has to tell a story. So hopefully the paper ends up in a way that actually people don't realize the work. That's actually a good thing. Because then it is telling the story in the right way, as opposed to, oh my God, these people were doing it from whenever to. So I'm glad that in some sense you don't read. But the way I say it is that as with any academic process, a research has to be rigorous. B, obviously, and again, this is something, at least from my perspective, if I'm in a business school, it has to be research that has an applied focus. That's again my own perspective. And so I think the subscription programs one or other things which I've done before, to me at least, seem to be in that right intersection. Something obviously that's very applied, but at the same time, at least as far as we knew, nobody had really done very detailed analysis of kind of at an individual member level, what happens, how do things change, and so on. So it took a little bit of time for us to also formulate kind of what questions are the important ones to ask. To me, that is the crux of any research paper, or that should be the crux, which is, rather than starting from the data perspective, you start from the questions. What is it that you're interested in, and why is this interesting, and to whom would it be interesting? It doesn't have to be that everybody needs to pick up a journal article and say, I'm going to apply it tomorrow. Uh, may or may not be. But at least some audience, be it academics, be it practitioners, be it whoever your relevant policymakers, somebody should be excited about it. And so I think in that sense, asking the questions, that took some time. Then making sure that the questions that we were asking also had the relevant data for it, that took some time as well. And then, of course, the real analysis is what takes the most time. And so we did that. And then just to kind of have our audience go through that, simulate the process of what happens in a paper, you send it and you hope for the best. So we had sent it to a Journal of Marketing Research, very good journal, obviously a top tier journal in marketing. But the journal, of course, assigns 3 reviewers, typically an area editor, to kind of talk a little bit about, then go through the paper and see kind of, is this paper worthy? And typically the reviewers are taking a perspective of, is it done competently? Is it asking the right questions? Is it something that the audience of the journal would find interesting? The other thing that at least I've started caring a lot more about, I would say, since I'm getting a little bit older now, is that, is this a paper that somebody, if they read 5 years from now, will they still like it? Which is, will they look back and say, I don't know how that paper got through? Or will they say, interesting question, interesting way of thinking about it. And so what is it that will hopefully keep the paper popular and have a slightly longer lifetime value of that paper as much as possible? So kind of putting all of that perspective with the review team and so on, it took almost 3 years or so, 3.5 years. It was 4 rounds. So it's basically meaning the reviewers saw it, they came back with comments. We took some time, send it back, and this kind of back and forth happened about 4 times. And so it was a little bit extensive. I would say, I won't call it outlier, but certainly towards the longer end of the review process. But at the end, thankfully, the review team was happy. We did, I think, what we could do, kind of like, again, the way at least I kind of urge a lot of students to do now is go above and beyond what review team is telling you. Because, this is your paper, your name is on it. And so I hope you will be proud of this paper when it comes out. And B, think about things that you would like to actually do, rather than kind of, oh, the team is telling me to do this or team is telling me to do that. No, this has to be your idea. So as much ownership you can take, the better it is.
Okay, amazing. And you've done so much research in kind of the pricing, the subscription model arena. There's been so many findings that you yourself have championed and pioneered. I mean, I know one of my favorite one was that I think I read somewhere that one of the things that you guys found was that when I think it was the relationship between the behavior of subscription programs and consumer behavior, and how only 1/3 of the effect of like the purchasing amount is
Yeah,
actually attributed to like economic benefits in a sense. And I was
correct.
like, huh, I thought that would be the main thing.
Yeah,
Like why is it only
yeah,
like 1/3 of people?
yeah.
So that was like some of the things that I found very interesting in a sense. From all of the research that you've done, what do you think has been the one that to you surprised you or that you felt has had the strongest impact on the audience it's put out in a sense?
So, I mean, if I talk about, I mean, there are many different audiences. I'll talk about audience of one, which is me. For me, what has been the most amazing collaboration is something that I had with a colleague slash mentor, whatever you want to call it, from Colombia, a person called Kamel Jadidi. He was on my dissertation committee, uh, a
Wow.
wonderful, wonderful collaborator. Uh, and, we've had several papers together. Whoever asks me, I tell them that, if not for Kamel, I think I would certainly not be as successful. So, you find these people that are giving their time, giving their advice, and working with you in some sense. Obviously everybody makes a trade-off of allocation of time, and the fact that I was getting a chunk of his time was very, very valuable for me. And so that, personally, I mean, the papers I worked with him, some of them have been very, very good in terms of getting at least nominated for certain awards. But regardless, for me, I think it's just the personal satisfaction of working with someone who had my back. And so that to me has been an amazing experience.
And I think it's one of the highest compliments when someone on your dissertation committee
Sure.
agrees to work with you, and it's just amazing in this sense. Tell me a little bit about, if you are allowed to, what's the research that you're working on now? What is the cutting edge information or something that you're passionately checking out right now in a sense, so we can spoiler it for our audience?
Certainly. Well, I hope the spoiler is something that happens soon too, rather than another 5 year wait. But there are two things that I'm kind of excited about these days. One is actually work with a colleague in my department, Ryan Du, who is an amazing researcher as well, machine learning, all that stuff. I'm learning from him. And a grad student, Zijun, who is in the econ department, but Ryan and I are her advisors. So we've actually been looking at TikTok videos and trying to figure out what makes videos popular. And in fact, and interestingly, what is the value of a follower on TikTok? And value meaning, like, obviously people are very excited about saying, oh, let's find the influencer. Let's find the influencer with the most number of followers. Are they as valuable in terms of the number of impressions, in terms of perhaps likes, or whatever the case might be? So Zishan, the grad student, actually downloaded about 500,000 TikTok videos over a 6-month period. And you can imagine, there's a lot of data, that's for sure. But what's more interesting, I think, for us is that there is a lot of unstructured data, which is there's the video itself, there's the background audio, there are the hashtags, there is the writing, there's the editing, all of that stuff, which likely makes the video popular and perhaps is more important than just the creator kind of characteristics. Yes, the person might be an influencer, but they're not just creating videos at random. And so, what is it about these videos? So, we've been doing a lot of work along those areas to try to find out, what makes a video click, so to speak, and what makes videos lemons. They had unfortunately had a history which was not as good as it could have been. And so we've been doing that as well. So that's one paper I'm very excited about. Hopefully, this will be Zision's job market paper, so coming soon. That should close soon, hopefully. The review process will start, but at least this part should close soon. The other paper I'm very excited about is a paper with a grad student, another grad student in my department called Enrique, and somebody I know from India. We've been doing a lot of work on something called a super app. And especially from in Malaysia, for example, has Gojek, if I remember right. And there are many other countries that have different kinds of super apps. Gojek, India there's Paytm, in China there's Weibo, or WeChat, all kinds of things. The interesting thing there is that on the one hand, you can imagine that the reason why the super app exists is because many of these companies want to curate the entire customer journey. You come in, you have the food delivery, you have restaurants, you have cabs, you have every possible thing. But on the flip side, if you think about all the work that has been done on complementary goods, typically they say you can do bundling of like hot dogs and buns, right? Why? Because they go together. Now here you have these super apps which have so many different services that may have nothing to do with each other. And so when we start thinking about the impact of a super app on consumer behavior, do consumers really value all of this? And if so, how much do they value? And so we've been lucky enough to work with a super app company where we have tons and tons of data in terms of customers' transactions over time, using different features of the app. So some of the features might be payment for utility bills. Another feature might be payment for travel tickets. A third feature might be just payment for buying insurance. And so how are all these things which have perhaps little to do with each other? How do they perhaps A, have synergy, and B, does that synergy differ by the type of customer? So for example, some people may be spending a lot on the app, and at some point as new features come up, they might say, you know what, I'm like maxing out here. I mean, how much do you want me to spend here now? And so they might actually take some of the spending from other features and transfer to the new one. So in some sense, a new feature for them from the app's perspective is simply cannibalizing what they were spending elsewhere. There are some other members who might not be spending as much, and as new features keep getting added up, they start finding more value. And so their pie size increases. And so, different customer heterogeneity, so to speak, might have different implications in terms of what might happen to overall spending.
My Wi-Fi just totally crashed. I can only assume that
It's
my
okay.
super app on my phone that is in charge of paying my utilities communicated that I was getting more smarter from this
Yeah.
conversation and crashed my Wi-Fi. That is the theory we will go with for the rest of this interview.
We can definitely do that.
Yeah, but that is extremely fascinating. I cannot decide which of those two papers is more interesting to me because they're both they're both such really good, like an amazing, I'd say, problems. On one side, you're bringing essentially the concepts of customer lifetime value to the social media world, and it's so true that the value of followers is never as what it seems. I know people with like just from a sales point of view, people who do like influencer marketing. I'm not a fan
Exactly.
of that term, who have thousands or like millions of followers, but they struggle to sell something, and some with a very
Exactly.
tight knit community, but they get like that engagement very like quick in a sense. So there's so much nuances that I think that is making me very, I would say, angry at the review process for delaying my ability to read
Well,
this
we'll certainly
research.
make sure to give you a copy of the paper hot off the press,
Please
hopefully
do,
soon. Uh,
please do in a sense. I will,
and then
will
the
get you
review
back
process
on.
will take its own time.
Yeah, we will have an entire interview with on just that in a sense.
Sure.
And I feel talking about the super app too much because again my phone might just kill me like in my sleep later and just be like yo cursed knowledge, you're not supposed to do this. But that is also very fascinating because now that I think about it, do I really need to pay my bills, order food, and at the same time get a cab from one app in a sense? And
Exactly.
how many of those features do I, as a consumer, actually use when I'm
Exactly.
thinking about the app in a
Exactly.
sense? So very very interesting, like theses or kind of like points of focus that I think not only you and your team, but I think all of us should at least stew on it until we can read your research at the very least. So thank you so much for sharing. As we wind down, and I think I think we've already hit the 45 minutes mark. I completely didn't realize you are very good at sharing your stories and make your research come to life in a sense. But as we wind down this conversation in a sense, what do you think is the most powerful part of academia to influence the world? Because again, with billionaires, it's very easy. They buy your service, and
Sure.
immediately there's a change in the power shift of the quadrant. But tell us a bit about the power academia has in making these changes and perpetuating ideas across the board.
I think I wish I could choose two. Maybe I'll choose two if you don't
You
mind. Uh,
can.
Certainly. So one is, I think, hopefully, kind of doing good research that finds its way into practice. So my colleague Pete Fader is very, very. I think it's a great example of that. He is somebody who is a rigorous researcher, has done a lot of amazing work, but at the same time has also kind of started two companies. One of them was sold to Nike, and so hopefully one has sort of an academic career where you do good work, but at the same time, through osmosis, through whatever else, are also influencing practice. That's one. The second thing I think is a big responsibility, at least I feel it, of being an academic is hopefully generating the next generation of good thinkers and people who would be leaders in the business community. And so that's another way in which one can make impact in terms of trying to see if you in the classroom, you as collaborating with students, whatever perspective one may have, hopefully are having a positive influence in how they think and change the world.
Amazing. What do you think is one thing that students should know about their professors, or the effort that their professors put into the research, to the classes, to everything that they do, that we may not be so aware in a sense? Well, what is the secret that I should go and tell all
Ah,
students and friends that they need to become aware of in a sense?
Oh, I mean, I would use just one word: have empathy, or two words, I guess. Everybody, as with students, I think, everybody is allocating time based on what they see as the best return. And I think for professors, I think all of us, I would say, want to do great in research. We also want to do great in the classroom, and we also want to serve the community in different ways. So I think everything takes time, and so if there is sometimes things don't go well in the classroom, that think of it as a minor blip rather than something persistent. So that's what I would say.
Oh, and I really like this whole conversation because you put a very human spotlight in. I mean, I think the world of academia, which people may not always think of exactly warm and fuzzy feelings when they think of research and hard evidence in a sense. But you've really put a human light to it, and I think more people would definitely want to find their voice, want to find what they are passionate about, and then this is a path for them to explore that in a sense. Final question. I promise I'll shut. I
Sure,
will
yeah, no, please.
zip it after this in a sense. For all of those who want to venture into the academic realm and see if this is something that they can use to I would say
Yeah.
investigate further the areas of their own passion. What's your advice for them? It's not an easy journey. Definitely, there is a
Yes.
lot of and you have to have a certain amount of, I would say, resilience to be
Yes.
successful in that.
Uh,
So what advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the advice would be, I would say, and again, this is a little bit stereotypical, but that's okay, I think, is that, much of the academic kind of life you may have has to be self driven in terms of finding the problems. And so I think there are certainly a set of people who are very, very good, persistent, motivated, and can come up with their own problems. There are also a set of people who are extremely good at executing the problems, uh, but may not be as great as coming up with innovative problems. I think it's good to find out which category you belong to, because I think there is value, obviously, in both of them. No great problem just sits on the table unless it's executed. And coming up with a problem is just a necessary but not sufficient condition for making it, through anything, not just academia. So I think kind of thinking about how comfortable are you in sort of unstructured environments where you are your own timekeeper, where nobody's, hounding down at the end of the day saying, what did you do? Because you're kind of on your own. And so if you like that environment, I think it's a great world to be in, being an academic. Whereas if you like a little bit more structure, sometimes externally imposed, perhaps academia may not be the best way there.
Okay. Okay, definitely a nice way to wrap up.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being on this show. I definitely am motivated to hopefully one day be able to attend one of your classes just from this
Please do.
conversation that
Of
I'm having.
course.
You are extremely wise, and at the same time have a brilliant way of articulating it that makes me interested in the data and the research and all of
I'm
that. So thank
glad.
you so much for being on this show in a sense. And I really do appreciate you taking the time. As you said, everyone's spending their time. It's a commodity in a sense, and I'm really thankful that you took a bit of that, took an hour out of your day to speak to our audience in a sense. And to our audience, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did, having the conversation in a sense. And as always, make sure you let us know in the comments your thoughts, your questions, and like this episode because it was amazing. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you especially to our speaker. You've been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, and with that, we'll wrap up for today and see you guys next Thursday.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.